It didn't feel wrong. At first, I remember thinking it wasn't worth worrying about. It was small, the kind of thing you notice and then let go. That's how all of them started. A moment that felt ordinary, almost forgettable, like background noise you don't turn around for. The first time, it was just a car parked off the side of a road. I shouldn't have been driving that late. No lights, no movement, just sitting there like it had always been there. I glanced at it, told myself it was nothing, and kept going. The second time, it was a voice. Quiet, almost careful, saying my name from somewhere I couldn't quite place. I remember stopping, listening, waiting for it to happen again, but it didn't. I told myself I must have misheard it, that maybe it came from a nearby room or a passing conversation. I moved on without checking. The third time, it was a door I knew I had locked. I remember the sound of the latch, the small click that always made me feel safe. But later, when I walked past it again, it wasn't fully closed. Not open either, just slightly out of place, like someone had tested it and left it there. Each time, there was a moment where I could have stopped, could have looked closer, could have treated it like something that mattered, but I didn't. None of it felt urgent. That's the part that stays with me. It never feels urgent when it starts. It feels small, explainable, easy to ignore, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because by the time you realize something isn't right, you're already further into it than you meant to be. Looking back, I can see how close I was to understanding what was actually happening. There were signs, small ones, quiet ones, the kind you only recognize after they're gone. But in the moment, I let them pass. I told myself everything was fine. And I think that's why I'm still thinking about them now. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I almost noticed. Because something was there. I just didn't treat it like it mattered until it was already too close. I keep replaying those moments, wondering what would have changed if I had stopped, turned, and looked longer before everything went quiet. Story one set up, just a normal drive. It was one of those drives I had done enough times that I didn't really think about it anymore. The road wasn't complicated, just long stretches of empty highway broken up by the occasional turn or small cluster of houses. I left later than I meant to, but that didn't bother me. I actually liked driving at night. It felt quieter, like the world had slowed down a little. I remember feeling tired, but not in a way that made me worried. Just that comfortable kind of tired where your thoughts drift and everything feels a little softer around the edges. The radio was on low, something I wasn't really listening to. And the only real sound was the steady hum of the tires against the road. There weren't many cars out, which wasn't unusual for that time. Maybe one every few minutes, headlights passing and disappearing behind me. After a while, even that stopped. It wasn't something I noticed right away. It just sort of crept in. The realization that I hadn't seen another car in longer than I should have. I checked my phone at a stop sign out of habit. No signal. That part didn't surprise me either. That stretch of road had always been patchy, and there were spots where you just didn't get anything at all. I set it back down without thinking much about it and kept driving. The road ahead was completely dark except for my headlights. Trees lined both sides, tall and uneven, their shadows stretching across the pavement in a way that made it hard to tell where the road ended and everything else began. It felt normal, but there was something about the stillness that didn't sit quite right. I told myself it was just because it was late. A few minutes later, I noticed the car. It was parked on the side of the road, just far enough off that it didn't block anything. No hazard lights, no headlights, nothing to suggest someone was inside or even nearby. It looked like it had been placed there carefully, not abandoned, just left. As I got closer, I slowed down slightly without meaning to. I think I was trying to see inside to catch some kind of movement or reflection, but the windows were too dark. For a second, I thought I saw something shift, but it could have just been the angle of my headlights. I passed it and kept going. For a moment, I considered stopping. Not fully pulling over, just slowing down enough to look back, maybe check if someone needed help. But the thought passed quickly. There was nothing clearly wrong, no signals, no signs of trouble. It would have been weird to stop for something like that. So I didn't. I kept driving, watching the road ahead as the car disappeared behind me. After a while, I convinced myself it wasn't even worth remembering. Just another random thing you see on a long drive and forget about later. But the silence felt heavier after that. It wasn't just the lack of cars anymore. It was the feeling that the road had become smaller somehow, more contained. Like I had moved into a part of it that didn't quite belong to the rest. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, more out of habit than anything else, and told myself to focus. It was just a normal drive, nothing unusual, nothing to think about. But even then, there was a part of me that kept going back to that car, the way it had been sitting there, the way it hadn't felt random, and how for just a second it had felt like it was waiting for something. Something was off. I tried to forget about it, but once something sticks in your head like that, it doesn't really go away. It just sits there quiet, waiting for something else to connect to it. The road kept stretching out ahead of me, the same long, empty strip cutting through darkness. I focused on driving, keeping my speed steady, letting the rhythm of it settle me again. For a few minutes it worked. Everything felt normal. Then I saw headlights behind me. They were faint at first, just a distant glow in the rearview mirror. I hadn't noticed them before, which struck me as strange. There hadn't been any turns or side roads where a car could have joined, at least none that I remembered passing. Still, I told myself I probably just missed it. Cars come and go. It wasn't unusual. I kept my eyes on the road, but every so often I checked the mirror again. The headlights stayed at the same distance, not getting closer, not falling back. Just there, steady, watching, in a way that didn't feel like normal traffic. After a while, I slowed down slightly, just enough to see if they'd pass me. They didn't. Instead, the lights dimmed for a second, like whoever was behind me had eased off the accelerator at the same time I did. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was controlled, almost deliberate. That was the first moment something didn't feel right. I told myself I was overthinking it. There were plenty of explanations. Maybe they were just tired like me. Maybe they didn't want to pass on a dark road. Maybe they were just being cautious. I nodded to myself, like that settled it. But when I checked the mirror again, the headlights were gone. Not farther back, not turned off in the distance. Just gone. I slowed down more this time, scanning the sides of the road as I drove. There was nowhere obvious for them to turn. No driveways, no intersections. Just trees and darkness stretching out in every direction. I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. A few minutes passed before I saw it again. The car. This time, it was parked on the opposite side of the road, facing the direction I was coming from. No lights again. No movement. Just sitting there, like before. But somehow it looked exactly the same. Same shape. Same position. That's when I felt it. Not fear. Not exactly. Just a shift. Like something had changed without making a sound. The air felt heavier inside the car. Like I had rolled up all the windows even though I hadn't. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept driving. As I passed it, I forced myself not to look too long, but my eyes still flicked toward it. The windows were just as dark as before. No reflection, no sign of anyone inside. But as I moved past, I had this strange, uncheckable feeling that if I looked back, something would be different. I didn't. I kept my eyes forward, staring at the road like it was the only thing that mattered. My thoughts started moving faster, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a version of events that felt normal. Maybe it wasn't the same car. Maybe I just thought it was. That explanation held for a few seconds. Then I checked my mirror again. And for just a moment, I thought I saw those headlights return. Not fully formed, not clear. Just a flicker of light where there shouldn't have been anything at all. I shouldn't have stopped. I don't know exactly what made me do it. Up until that point, I had been telling myself to ignore everything. To keep driving, keep my eyes forward, treat it like any other night. But that feeling kept building, quiet and persistent, like something unfinished. So when I saw a narrow gravel pull off up ahead, I slowed down. It wasn't a full decision at first, just easing off the gas, letting the car drift toward the side of the road. Like I needed a break. That's what I told myself. That I was tired, that I needed a second to clear my head. By the time I came to a stop, it already felt like a mistake. The engine idled softly, the sound louder now that everything else had gone completely still. No wind, no distant cars, nothing. Just that low hum and the faint ticking of the engine cooling. I sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. Then I checked the mirror. Nothing behind me. No headlights, no movement. For a second, I felt a small wave of relief. Like maybe I'd been building it up into something it wasn't. Maybe stopping would prove that there was nothing there at all. I reached for my phone out of habit. Still no signal. I remember thinking that was strange, even for that area. Like I had driven just far enough into the wrong place without realizing it. That's when I noticed it. Not in the mirror this time. In front of me, at the edge of the trees, just beyond where my headlights started to fade, something moved. It wasn't fast or obvious. Just a shift. Subtle enough that I almost missed it. I leaned forward slightly, trying to focus. And then I saw the shape. A person. Standing still, just inside the darkness. Far enough that the light didn't fully reach them. I don't know how long they had been there. That was the part that hit me first. Not where they came from, not what they wanted. Just the realization that they might have already been standing there before I even stopped, watching. I felt my chest tighten, that slow, heavy awareness settling in. They didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't step closer. They just stood there. And then, very slightly, they shifted their weight. Not toward me, but not away either. Like they were adjusting, getting more comfortable. That's when something in me snapped out of it. I didn't wait to understand it. Didn't wait to see if they would move again. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road faster than I meant to. The tires crunching against the gravel louder than anything had been all night. As I drove away, I didn't look back right away. I kept my eyes forward, breathing shallow, trying to convince myself it was over. But after a few seconds, I couldn't help it. I checked the mirror. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, just at the edge of the darkness behind me, I thought I saw movement again, closer to the road now. And I realized too late that stopping hadn't been neutral. It had been noticed. I still think about that road. I didn't slow down again after that. I drove the rest of the way with both hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road like if I looked anywhere else, something might appear again. Eventually, other cars started showing up. A few headlights in the distance, a truck passing in the opposite lane. Normal things, familiar things. But none of it really settled me. It just made everything that came before feel more isolated. Like I had passed through something I wasn't supposed to notice. By the time I got home, it didn't feel real anymore. It felt like one of those strange, half-clear memories that fade the more you try to hold on to them. I told myself it was nothing. Just someone standing near the road. Maybe they lived nearby. Maybe they were dealing with their own problem, but that explanation never fully stayed. Because of the way they didn't react, no movement toward me, no attempt to get my attention, not even surprise, just stillness. Like my presence didn't change anything for them at all. And then there was the car. I keep thinking about that too. The way it appeared more than once. The way it felt placed, not parked. Like it wasn't there by accident, but for a reason I never understood. I still drive that road sometimes, not often, and never that late. But every time I do, I find myself looking at the same spot where I pulled over, slowing down just a little, even when I don't mean to. I've never seen anyone there again, which somehow makes it worse. Because it doesn't feel like something that ended. It feels like something I just happened to leave before it started. Story 2, setup. It was supposed to be a normal night. The second time didn't happen on a road. It was inside, somewhere that should have felt controlled, predictable, a place where I knew exactly what was around me, and where everything was supposed to be. I was staying alone for the night in a small rental I had booked last minute. Nothing unusual about it. Just a quiet place, slightly outside town. The kind of spot people use when they want a break from everything else. I remember thinking it was actually a good thing after the drive. Somewhere calm, somewhere still. When I got there, everything looked normal. The outside was dimly lit by a single porch light, flickering just enough to make the shadows shift when I walked up. I didn't think much of it at the time. Lights do that sometimes. Old wiring, maybe. It wasn't enough to feel like a problem. Inside, it was clean. Simple layout. A small living area, a narrow hallway, one bedroom. Nothing out of place. I did what I always do in a new place. Walked through each room, checked the windows, opened a couple of cabinets without any real reason. Just a habit. Everything seemed fine. I locked the front door carefully. I remember that part clearly. The sound it made, the way the handle didn't move after, it gave me that small sense of reassurance you get when something clicks into place. I set my bag down, turned on a lamp, and let myself relax a little. For a while, it actually felt good to be there. Quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, just peaceful. I sat down, scrolled through my phone, tried to get a signal, but it was weak. Barely anything loading. That didn't surprise me either. The place was far enough out that I expected it. I plugged my phone in anyway and left it on the table. After a bit, I noticed the door. Not the front door. The one down the hallway. It was slightly open. Not wide enough to see inside clearly. Just enough that it wasn't fully closed. I couldn't remember if it had been like that when I first walked through, which was strange because I'm usually good at noticing things like that. I stood there for a second, just looking at it. There was nothing unusual about a door being open. It didn't mean anything on its own, but something about the angle felt off, like it hadn't been left that way naturally. I walked over and pushed it shut. It didn't close all the way. There was a slight resistance near the frame, like something wasn't lining up properly. I had to press a little harder than expected to get it to click. Even then, it didn't feel solid, just closed enough. I tested the handle once, just to be sure. It held. I told myself it was just an old door. Stolen wood, maybe. Nothing worth thinking about. As I turned away, I noticed one of the windows in the living area. The latch looked loose. Not broken, just not fully secure. I reached out and adjusted it, pushing it down until it felt tighter. Again, it didn't seem like a big deal. Just small imperfections in a place that probably hadn't been updated in a while. Still, I checked the rest of the windows after that. All of them were closed. I went back to the living area, sat down again, and tried to settle in. But something about the space felt different now. Not unsafe, just less certain. Like the kind of place where things don't quite stay the way you leave them. I told myself it was nothing. And for a while, I believed it. The first sound, I don't remember exactly how much time passed before I heard it. Long enough that I had settled into the quiet, stopped thinking about the door and the window, convinced myself everything was normal again. I was sitting on the couch, my phone in my hand, the screen dim from lack of signal when the sound came. It was soft. So soft that at first I wasn't even sure it had actually happened. A faint knock. Not loud enough to feel urgent, not sharp enough to be clear. Just a small, dull tap from somewhere deeper in the house. I lifted my head slightly, listening, waiting for it to repeat. It didn't. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have, like it was holding something back. I stayed still for a few seconds, trying to place where the sound came from, but there wasn't enough to go on. I told myself it was the house. Old places make noise. Wood shifts, pipes settle, things expand and contract. I'd heard those kinds of sounds before. This wasn't different. It just felt like it was. I let it go. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time, I was paying attention. Another knock, slightly clearer. Still quiet, but distinct enough that I couldn't pretend I imagined it. It came from the direction of the hallway, somewhere near that door I had pushed shut earlier. I turned my head slowly, staring toward it. Everything looked the same. The hallway was dim, lit only by the soft glow from the lamp behind me. The door at the end was still closed, the outline just visible in the low light. Nothing moved, nothing changed. I listened. Nothing. I stood up without fully deciding to. Each step felt louder than it should have as I moved toward the hallway. The air felt different there, cooler somehow, like it hadn't been touched in a while. When I reached the door, I stopped. There was no sound now, no movement, just the quiet, steady stillness of an empty space. I reached out and touched the handle. It felt normal, cold, solid, exactly the way it should. I hesitated for a second, then pushed it open. The room inside was empty, nothing out of place, nothing disturbed. Just a small, plain space that looked exactly like it had before. I stood there longer than I needed to, scanning the corners, the floor, the walls, like I expected something to reveal itself if I waited long enough. It didn't. I closed the door again, more firmly this time, making sure it latched. When I turned back toward the living area, something felt off. I couldn't place it immediately. Just a subtle shift, like the space had changed in a way I hadn't seen happen. Then I noticed the lamp. The light seemed dimmer, not by much. Just enough that the edges of the room felt darker, like the shadows had moved closer without being invited. I walked back toward it, glancing around as I did. That's when I saw it. My phone. It wasn't where I left it. It was still on the table, but slightly turned, angled in a way I didn't remember placing it. It was a small difference, something easy to dismiss, but it stood out immediately. I stopped in the middle of the room, staring at it. I tried to recall if I had moved it earlier, if maybe I had set it down differently than I thought. But I couldn't remember doing that. The silence pressed in again, thicker now, like it was waiting for me to react. And then, from behind me, somewhere down the hallway, another knock, softer than before, but closer. It knew I was there. I didn't turn around right away. The sound had come from behind me, closer than before, but something about it made me hesitate. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It felt measured, like it wasn't meant to startle me, just to let me know it was there. I stood still, listening, trying to catch anything else. A breath, a shift, the smallest movement that would make sense of it. There was nothing. Slowly, I turned. The hallway looked the same. The door at the end was closed, just like I had left it. The light hadn't changed. The shadows hadn't moved. For a moment, it almost felt like I had imagined everything again. Then the handle moved. Just slightly. A small controlled motion, like someone on the other side had tested it without committing. The metal shifted down a fraction, then returned to its place. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. The handle stayed still after that, like nothing had happened. But the air in the room felt different now. Heavier. Aware. And then I heard it. My name. Quiet. Clear. Right on the other side of the door. Not loud enough to echo. Not soft enough to mistake. Just enough to reach me without effort. I froze. It wasn't a question. It wasn't shouted or repeated. It was said once, calmly, like the person already knew I was there, like they didn't need to check. I tried to think. There was no reason for anyone to be there. No one knew where I was staying. I hadn't told anyone. The place was supposed to be empty. The door shifted again, not opening. Just a slow, almost careful pressure from the other side. Enough to make the frame creak faintly, like someone leaning into it, testing how much it would give. I took a step back without realizing it. Then another. My eyes stayed fixed on the door, waiting for it to move again, waiting for it to open just enough to confirm what I already knew. It didn't. Instead, the pressure stopped. The handle stayed still, everything went quiet. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This felt deliberate, like whatever was on the other side had decided to stop, not because it was gone, but because it knew I had heard it. That's when I understood something I hadn't wanted to think about. This wasn't random. It wasn't someone confused or lost. It was controlled, careful, and it was aware of me in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't wait for anything else to happen. I turned, grabbed my phone, and moved toward the front door as quickly as I could without making noise. Every step felt too loud, like it would give me away, even though it already knew I was there. As I reached for the handle, I heard one last sound behind me. Not a knock, not my name. Just a slow, quiet shift from inside the hallway. Closer than before. I never got an explanation. I didn't stop moving until I was outside. The door closed behind me harder than I meant it to, the sound echoing in a way that made everything feel louder than it should have. For a second, I just stood there, breathing, trying to decide if I had imagined any of it. But I knew I hadn't. I got to my car quickly, fumbling with the keys more than I should have, like my hands weren't keeping up with what I was thinking. Once I was inside, I locked the doors immediately, back toward the house. Nothing, no movement. No lights changing. No sign that anyone had been there at all. It looked exactly the way it had when I arrived. I stayed there for a few seconds, waiting for something to happen. For a shadow to move, for a door to open, for any kind of confirmation that what I heard had a source. There was nothing. I left without going back inside. Later, I told someone about it. Not everything, just enough to make sense of why I had left early. They mentioned calling someone to check the place, maybe the owner, maybe even the authorities. I agreed at the time. But I never followed up. I didn't want to hear that nothing was found. I didn't want someone to walk through those same rooms and tell me it was empty, that there was no sign anyone had been there at all. Because that would mean the only explanation left was the one I couldn't prove. And the part that stays with me isn't what I heard. It's how easily I ignored it the first time. How something so small turned into something I couldn't explain. And how close it felt by the end. Story 3 set up middle of nowhere. The third time didn't happen on a road or inside a house. It was somewhere quieter than both. I had taken a short trip out to a place I'd been meaning to visit for a while. Nothing far, just a stretch of land that felt removed from everything else. A few scattered campsites, long dirt paths, and more open space than I was used to seeing in one place. It was the kind of area people go to when they want to be alone without feeling completely cut off. I got there late in the afternoon, just as the light started to soften. The air felt different right away. Cleaner, quieter, like the world had been turned down a little. I parked near one of the outer spots, far enough from the others that I couldn't hear anyone else, but close enough that I knew I wasn't completely isolated. At least that's what I told myself. There were a few signs of other people. Tire tracks in the dirt, a distant tent set up across an open patch, something small like a cooler left near a tree. Nothing unusual. Just enough to remind me I wasn't the only one there. I unpacked slowly, taking my time setting things up. There was no rush, no reason to hurry. The quiet made everything feel stretched out, like I had more time than I actually did. I remember standing there for a moment after I finished, just looking out at the open space, letting it settle in. It felt calm, not empty, not uncomfortable, just still. As the sun started to dip lower, the temperature shifted slightly. A light breeze moved through the trees, carrying the kind of distant, indistinct sounds you can't quite place. Leaves brushing against each other, something moving far off, maybe footsteps, maybe not. I didn't think much of it. Places like that always have background noise. It's part of what makes them feel alive. I walked a little further out, following one of the narrow paths that curved around the edge of the area. That's when I saw him. He was standing near another campsite, not too far from mine. At first, I thought he was just organizing something, maybe unpacking like I had been earlier, but he wasn't really doing anything. Just standing there, looking out toward the trees. I slowed down slightly as I passed, more out of instinct than anything else. He didn't acknowledge me. No glance, no nod, nothing that would suggest he even noticed I was there. It wasn't unfriendly, just absent, like he was focused on something else entirely. I kept walking, not wanting to linger. After a few steps, I looked back. He hadn't moved. Same position, same direction. For a second, I thought about saying something, just a quick greeting, something normal. But the moment passed. It didn't feel necessary, and I didn't want to force it, so I let it go. When I made my way back to my own spot, the light had dropped enough that everything looked slightly different. Shadows stretched longer, blending into each other in ways that made it harder to tell where things began and ended. I started a small fire, more for the comfort of it than anything else. The flames gave off just enough light to make the space feel contained, like I had carved out a small area that belonged to me. For a while it worked. I sat there listening to the quiet, letting the steady crackle of the fire fill in the gaps. But every now and then I found myself looking up, out toward where I had seen him standing. I couldn't see him anymore, which should have been normal. But something about it didn't feel like he had just left. It felt like I had simply lost track of where he was. And out there, that was enough to make the quiet feel different. They didn't act right. I tried to ignore it at first. It didn't feel like enough to think about. Just the absence of something I expected to see. People move around, especially in places like that. They go out for walks, gather things, disappear into the trees for a while. There was nothing unusual about not seeing him anymore. Still, I kept looking. Not directly, not in a way that felt obvious. Just small glances between moments, checking the same area without really meaning to. The fire burned low in front of me, its light flickering unevenly across the ground. And every time the shadows shifted, I found myself trying to match them to something real. After a while, I heard footsteps. Not close, not immediately identifiable, just the sound of something moving over dirt and dry leaves. Slow, uneven, like someone walking without a clear direction. I looked up. He was there again, standing a little closer this time, just beyond the edge of the firelight. I hadn't seen him approach. That was the first thing that didn't sit right. One moment there was nothing. The next, he was just there, not emerging from a path, not stepping into view. Just already in place, like I had missed the part where he arrived. I gave a small nod, something automatic, a quiet acknowledgement. This time, he looked at me. The eye contact lasted longer than it should have, not aggressive, not friendly. Just steady, like he was trying to hold it for a reason. Then, after a second too long, he nodded back. It felt delayed, not in a way that made sense, like he had hesitated or reconsidered. More like he had taken a moment to decide what the right response was supposed to be. I looked away first. Something about it made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't even clearly wrong. Just slightly out of sync, like we weren't reacting to the same moment at the same time. I tried to focus on the fire again. But the quiet had changed. It wasn't just the absence of noise anymore. It felt like everything had pulled back. The breeze had slowed. The distant sounds had faded. Even the leaves seemed to settle into stillness. All of it focused the space around us into something smaller, more contained. I could feel him there without looking. That awareness stayed steady, like a pressure I couldn't shift. After a minute, I glanced up again. He was closer. Not by much, just enough that I noticed the difference immediately. I hadn't heard him move. He wasn't walking toward me now. He had already stopped, standing just outside the reach of the light again. Same posture, same stillness. I opened my mouth, thinking I should say something. Ask if everything was okay. Make it normal. But before I could, he spoke. Just one sentence. Quiet, calm, like it didn't matter whether I responded. He mentioned something I had done earlier, something small, something I hadn't thought anyone else had seen. I felt a slow tension settle in my chest. There hadn't been anyone around when I did that. I was sure of it. I nodded anyway, like I understood what he meant. Like it made sense for him to know. But it didn't, and the more I thought about it, the less I could explain how long he had actually been there, or how much of me he had been watching. I left without looking back. I didn't respond to what he said. I just nodded, like it was normal, like I understood how he could know that. But my mind was already trying to catch up, running through the last few hours, replaying small moments I hadn't thought anyone else was around to see. He didn't say anything else after that. He just stood there. The silence stretched between us again, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something had settled into place, something I hadn't noticed forming until it was already there. I looked back down at the fire, trying to break the moment. That's when I saw it. Footprints, not mine. They were just at the edge of the light, pressed into the dirt in a way that caught the flicker of the flames. I stared at them for a second, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. They were fresh, clear enough that the shape hadn't softened yet. The edges still defined. They led toward me, stopping just short of where I was sitting. I hadn't seen him walk there. I hadn't heard anything close enough to explain it. Slowly, without meaning to, I followed the direction they came from with my eyes. They didn't come from the path. They came from behind me. From the darker side of the campsite, where there was nothing but open space and trees stretching further back than I could see. I felt something shift inside me then, not panic. Just clarity. The kind that doesn't build, doesn't warn you. It just arrives, sudden and complete. I looked up again. He was still there. Same position. Same distance. But now it felt different. Because I knew something I hadn't known a moment before. He hadn't just walked up from the front. He had been closer, much closer. Close enough to stand behind me without making a sound. Close enough to watch without being seen. I didn't let myself react to that thought. I didn't want to give him anything to respond to. Instead, I reached over calmly and picked up my keys. The movement felt slow, controlled, like I was trying to match whatever pace he had set without realizing it. I stood up, brushing off my hands as if I was just finishing up for the night. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge it at all. I stepped away from the fire, keeping my movements steady, casual, like nothing had changed. Each step toward my car felt longer than it should have. I didn't look at him again. I didn't want to see if he had moved or if he was watching me leave. I just kept walking. When I reached the door, I opened it quietly, slipped inside, and locked it without hesitation. The sound felt louder than everything else that night. For a second, I sat there, hand still on the wheel, trying to decide if I should look, if I should check. But I didn't. I started the engine, turned the car around, and drove away. And I never looked back. Final reflection. The things you don't question. I've thought about all three of those moments more than I probably should have. Not in a way that feels dramatic or overwhelming, but in a quiet, persistent way. Like something unfinished that keeps returning when everything else is still. And every time I go back to them, it's never the obvious parts that stay with me. It's the beginning. The small details I didn't question when they first happened. The parked car I passed without slowing down. The sound I heard and chose to ignore. The person standing just far enough away that I convinced myself they weren't part of anything I needed to think about. None of those things felt dangerous at the time. That's what makes them difficult to forget. Because there was always a moment where I could have stopped and treated it differently. Where I could have paid attention instead of moving on. But I didn't because nothing felt urgent enough to deserve that kind of reaction. And maybe that's how it works. Not loud, not obvious. Just quiet enough that you let it happen. Looking back, I don't think any of those situations were random. Not completely. There was something consistent in all of them. A sense that whatever was there wasn't reacting to me, but waiting, watching, taking its time, not forcing anything. Just seeing how far things could go without being noticed. That's the part I can't explain. And it's the part that still lingers. Even now, in places that feel familiar, I catch myself checking things more carefully than I used to. Doors, windows, spaces that should feel predictable, not because I hear anything, but because I remember what it felt like when I didn't, that moment right before something becomes real, and how easy it is to miss it.